So in this video I'm going to cover off all the questions I was asked in a few posts about how I catch flathead in the Swan River. So I'll cover a range of topics like tides, how to deal with weed, structure, lures, retrieves, areas, filleting, how to handle the fish and much more. So I think the most asked question was around what is the best tide or time to catch flatties in the Swan. The great thing about flathead, you can really target them any time of day or night. The tide does make a bit of a difference, so you can still catch them at any part of the tide, but I think the peak time is at rising tide, sort of that right in the middle. So those sort of couple of hours between the change, and also the run out tide as well is just as good. Having said that, I still target fish at the bottom of a tide. So this is where I'll probably go to some of those calmer areas where it's really rocky and there's some nice drop-offs that I probably couldn't reach if the water was right up. So you often don't get as big size flathead, but you can still get them in really good numbers. So when it's at the bottom of a tide like here, during the summer that often lines up with the early mornings, so with kids and whatnot, that's a time that I can get out. So if it's early morning, I'll find those rockier drop-off areas when it's lined up with a low tide. If the tide's right up, I'll often fish along the grassy edge, so the water will be right up against the bank and the fish often sit there. So I'll walk up a quiet area and just cast along the edge of the tall grass, and you'll often pick up quite a few flatties there. So taking into consideration what I discussed about the tides, it also impacts on, the areas of flats that I'll be targeting. So one of the key areas I like to target is in between rocky, weedy areas. So here it's a lot more finesse style fishing, where you sort of want it to be a calmer day, or pick it a spot where you're out of the wind so you can really see and walk in between weedy, rocky areas. So basically I'm just hopping my lure in between the weeds.
Oh, yes!
And waiting for the flatty to ambush.
What a hit!
So it's not banks of weed here, as you can see there, there's just plants and little bits of structure where they're hiding. The other, more traditional sort of weedy banks here. So I like to target the little pizza cutout shapes, so sections where there's little channels into the weed. Often I'll find fish hiding there. You can cast alongside the weed banks as well, but these little channels are really good little hot spots where you'll find them. Also look for the bait, where the bait are flowing past, so they'll swing through those little channels, cast into there. So here's an example of fishing the high tide. Often when there's a bit of a breeze blowing your water in towards the brush there as well, that can be a really good combination. If you go to a spot like this though, you want to be there first. You don't want to walk over that ground after someone else has already walked past there. Also, you got to make sure you don't get your lure caught in the brush. Out of a bit of a mare here. And one of the most traditional areas is that broken, weedy area. You're casting over the top here, using a large lures to cover as much ground as you can and canvassing. This is probably, a bread and butter area for catching flatties. Just to the left there. So with this question, I got to admit I get spiked all the time. The main two spikes are about 2 centimeters either side of its head. There's also some dorsal fin spikes, but they only really pop up if you push them up. So if you grab about 2 to 3 centimeters, hold tightly behind the head, you'll be fine. if there's lots of weed or the tide's really low, it can be a bit of a pain. So a lot of it is picking the right spot for the conditions, but otherwise using lures like micro meats, which use assist hooks, or you could use a like a mini stick bait. So here's a micro stick bait, the zip bait Raphael, where there's no bib, so it doesn't pick up any of the straggle weed. You can remove one of the front trebles as well, or you could use a TT switchblade with assist hooks, take off the two trebles and use that instead. Same with like your ZXs and whatnot. I know ZXs are really popular, but if I'm using them, I'll change the hooks so that they're a little bit of a larger assist hook. So you can catch them anywhere in the river pretty much all year round. However, I target certain areas, and this is just my opinion.
Flathead.
So in the late autumn, winter sort of time period, I'm targeting the more upper regions or the middle area of the Swan River.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily targeting the flats, it's more rocky drop-offs, rock walls, and around bridges.
Yeah. Usually set at 6 at the bottom and 2 up, then slow one.
Once it hits the sort of late winter, early to mid-spring, I'll target the sort of lower middle reaches and down the canning. And then when it hits summer, I'll target the much more lower reaches plus pretty much everywhere else in the river. So in summer you can get them wherever you like. So this is a really difficult question because I use so many different types of lures, but I'll give you, I guess, a bit of a breakdown of the different categories. So for hard body, Daiwa double clutch, 90mm, laser Azu or a gold one, zip bait Riggy in gold. Can't go wrong, it's probably one of my favourite hard bodies that I've used. And the zip bait's Raphael, which I mentioned before, because it's got no bib and you can use it in so many different areas. Lots of brim bycatch as well for that too. So for soft plastics and jig style lures, I'd go with the Vex Buckaboo or the Jigwig. In the Swan River there's heaps of blowfish or pufferfish which absolutely destroy your soft plastics. So anywhere downstream from the city, I'd be using those lures over other soft plastics. In the winter it's not as bad, and also in the upper reaches I'll use soft plastics. I really like the Z-Man Curly Tails 4-inch, and I like the prawn style Rapala Imposter. For the metals and others, I've got the Vex Micro Meat, so I like the orange and the yellow colours. TT Switchblade, I like black because I can use it for brim as well, or mulloway, and the Jig Para micro jigs 10 gram, I like the orange ones. So how do I fillet flathead? I'll just run through a section from one of my previous videos. So this is one way to do it. This is probably not my most preferred way, but a good way as well. So I go behind the pectoral fin, put the knife along the backbone, slowly make my way through the rib bones, and then slide my knife all the way to the end. I don't cut all the way through, I leave the fillet attached to the flathead so I can use it to pull off the skin. So here I'm just making a small incision right at the end here, working my knife down for about 4 to 5 centimeters, maybe a little bit more, and then I'm just going to peel the skin back. If you get this right, you can literally peel the skin back with the pin bone sticking to the skin. It's sitting in the cooler backpack and the ice for probably about 6 or 7 hours, so it didn't quite work this time, but if they're nice and fresh, sometimes when you peel back the skin, the pin bones will just come with it straight away. You can see here there's a few pin bones attached, but only really a few of them, so I had to cut out the remainder. But all the skin's taken off. I've just got to trim up the fillet to get rid of some of the red meat and a little bit sticking behind. So here I'll just take out the last few pin bones that were missed out with that trick. So I'm just cutting off any of that sort of like veiny membrane that's left behind, or little bits of red meat, which is makes it look, it doesn't really matter that much, but it makes it look a lot nicer and tastes a little bit better. So So same technique here to take the fillet back, so running the knife along the backbone, and I'm trying to do it in sort of one motion past the bones as well, rather than a sawing action. Here I'm working my knife all the way up now, and I'm holding onto the skin as sort of leverage against the blade. So here you take off most of the skin. A lot of it will be left behind, but you just trim it off afterwards. This way the fillets are a little bit more neat and a little bit less rough. Sometimes when you rip off the skin, it can sort of make the surface of the fish a little bit rough on where the skin's been ripped off, particularly if the fillets are cold, like what happened before. Here I'll take out the pin bones, so just run the knife along each side of the pin bones. You can feel how far they go back. And I'll look for the little bits of skin that I've left and just neaten them up. Again, any of the membrane or little bits of bread meat will cut off. These fillets went down a treat for a Nashville hot fish sandwich. I'll try and put this recipe in one of my videos later in the year. Thanks for. So the retrieve speed's different depending on the lure I use, and also if it's summer or winter. In summer I'm retrieving fairly quickly, so I've got a vexed jigwig Bon Jovi style here, and I'm using this the same as I would most sort of soft plastics, other than a prawn style where I might go a little bit slower. But I'm doing a slow to medium retrieve, sort of flick it around, a few little pauses. If you watch my hand, not the reel, in the next section, you'll get an idea of the retrieval speed. So it's a fairly constant, a few little pauses. I'll show you a video in a minute where it's during the winter and it's a lot slower. So I'll show you how I hop this one back. It's a 5 gram lure, so it's a 5 gram jig head, size 1/0 I believe. So once it sinks, give it 3 rips up. It's pretty shallow here, so it doesn't take long to hit the bottom. A few more rips up, slow retrieve in, a few little hops. Pulled through some weed there. Now I'm getting closer to a banky area where I'm pulling it alongside a weedy bed, so I'm just doing little hops next to it. And we're on. So in the next video, it will be the middle of winter, and I often predominantly just use large soft plastic, so a 4-inch soft plastic, and you'll see that I'll be retrieving it a lot slower. With these, just wait till it sinks at the bottom, then a slow to medium retrieve with a few little flicks each time it hits the bottom. Really slow roll. During the winter the water is a lot colder, so they're not as active, and you sort of need to get the lure a little bit closer to them for them to smash it. Bigger lure is a bigger target for them as well. So nice and slow. Thought I had a little touch, so cast right back out to the same spot. Little touch there. There we go. I could feel a lot of weight on this one. He was nice and big. When he flicked there and I saw the size of him, he was massive, but he wasn't fighting at all. He was literally basically swimming towards me. I don't think he realised what was going on. So before he could have a run, I pulled him straight up. I could see that the lure was right down his mouth, and I'm on the 6 pound line. So I generally just use my Shimano Stratex CI4 2500. They don't make these anymore, so the Vanfords are the new equivalent because it's got the CI4 body. I think the Miravilles are quite similar as well. I then have a Daiwa TD0 7.6, which I've been using a lot this year. It's a little bit of a faster action, so probably a little bit better for using soft plastics or jig head style lures. So you can set the hook, and not as great for little trebles or little assist hooks, where the TD Hyper is really good for that because it's an 8'6" rod and it's got a lot of flex and a lot more forgiving in that sense. With the 8'6" as well, I can also cast an absolute mile, so it's really good on the flats. If I'm in an area, sort of middle reaches of a Swan River where I'm fishing a little bit close quarters, it can get a little bit long if you're around trees and whatnot, but on the flats it's an absolute weapon of a rod, and it's quite cheap as well. I then generally use 8 pound braid, so I've got Daiwa Expedition 8 pound braid on, and then 8 pound fluorocarbon leader generally. Do I use scent? Yeah, I do generally through the winter when the blowfish or pufferfish aren't as bad. When you put scent on and there's blowfish around, it just attracts them and they smash up your soft plastics. In the winter it doesn't matter as much, or if you're sort of upstream from the city there's a lot fewer blowfish, so then I'll use scent in those circumstances. Water direction and flow, I just make sure I'm using the right size jig head, so I'm getting my lure into the target area. If the water direction is ripping it across, then I try and cast into the direction of the flows coming, so it's sort of dropping towards me, but it's not a huge issue from the shore. It's more of an issue if you're on a boat. Sonar theory probably makes some difference, but I don't let it exclude times when I go fishing. I can really only go fishing when I can, and I pick the spots based on the tide and wind direction. So they're the main two factors that I consider when flathead fishing. And windy days versus calmer days. So on windy days, I'll pick an area where I can maximize my casting distance, or if it's really windy, I'll find a spot in the Swan River where I'm sheltered and can escape it. So often that will mean, depending whether I fish on the north or the south side of the river, or I might find a little cove area where I can escape the wind. Wind also gives you great casting distance, so if you can put up with it, it's a really good way to fish. I've got a video I put up a few weeks ago which shows that as well. Thanks for watching, really appreciate it. If you've got any other questions about flathead or other types of fishing, please ask in the comment section below.